Something walks whistling past my house every night at 3:03. Every night, no matter the weather, something walks down our street whistling softly. You can only hear it if you're in the living room or in the kitchen when they walk by, and it always starts at exactly 3:03. The sound starts faint, somewhere near the beginning of the lane near the Carson place. We're towards the middle of the street, so the whistling moves past us, before fading away in the direction of the cul-de-sac. When I was younger, my sister and I would sneak into the kitchen some nights to listen. Mom and Dad didn't like that and would catch hell if they found us out there, but they were never too hard on us since we always stuck to the one big rule: don't try to look out, whatever was whistling. My neighborhood is a funny place. I've lived here since I was 6 and I love it. The houses are small but well kept, good-sized yards, plenty of places to roam. There are a lot of kids here my age. I turned 13 back in October. We grew up together and would always play 4 squares in the cul-de-sac or roam around the back porch to back porch in the summer. This was a good place to grow up. I'm old enough to see it. There's only 2 strange things here: the night whistling and the good luck. The whistling never bothered me much. Like I said, I couldn't even hear it from my bedroom, but my mom and dad don't like talking about it, so I've stopped asking questions. My dad is a strong guy, tall and calm. He has an accent since he moved to the U.S. as a kid. His family, my grandparents, were from the islands. That's what they call it. My dad, the only time he isn't so calm is if the whistler comes up. He talks a little quicker then. Eyes move faster, and he tells us not to think about it so much and to always remember the one rule, the big rule. Don't try to look outside when the whistler goes past. Not that we could even look if we wanted. See, there are shutters on the windows, on the inside of every window. Thick pieces of heavy canvas that pulled from the top and latched to the bottom of the window frame. Each latch has a small lock, about the size that you would find on a diary. My dad locks these shutters every night before we all go to bed and keeps the key in his room. My mom and I don't know what she thinks about the whistling. I don't know what she thinks about the whistling. I've seen her out in their living room before at 3:03 when the sound starts. I could see her if I cracked my door open just an inch to peek. She's not out there often. At least, I haven't caught her much. But once or twice a month, I think she sits out there on her big red couch just listening. The whistler has the same tune every night. It's cheerful. Da 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 dum. Da 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 dum. Remember how I said there were 2 odd things where I lived? Well, besides our night whistler, everyone in the neighborhood is really lucky. It's hard to explain, and Dad doesn't like us talking about this part much either. But good things just seem to happen to people around here a lot. Usually it's small things: winning a radio contest, or getting an unexpected promotion at work, or finding some arrowheads buried in the yard, the authentic kind. The weather is pretty good and there's no crime, and everybody's garden blossoms extra bright in the fall. A million little blessings I've heard my mom say about living here. But the main reason we stay here, why we moved here in the first place, is my sister Nola. She was born very sick, something with her lungs. We couldn't even bring her home when she was born, only visit her in the hospital. She was so small, I remember. Small even compared to the other babies. A machine had to breathe for her. We moved into our house to be closer to the hospital. As soon as we moved here, Nola started getting better. Doctors couldn't figure it out. They chalked it up to whatever they were doing, but we all could tell they were confused. But my parents knew, even I knew, Nola was getting better just after the little million blessings we got for living in our neighborhood. So that's why we stayed, even after we found out that for every small miracle that happens here every day, now and then some bad things happen. But they only happen if you look for the whistler. Our neighborhood has a welcoming committee. They show up with macaroni casserole and a gift basket and a manila folder whenever someone new moves in. They're very friendly for where people show up when we moved in 7 years ago. The committee made small talk, gave me a Snickers bar, and took turns holding Nola. It was her first week out of the hospital, so they were extra careful. Then the committee asked to speak to my parents in private, so I went to my room where I still managed to hear nearly every word. The welcoming committee told my parents about how nice the neighborhood was. Really exceptionally hard to explain kind of nice. And then they told my parents about the even harder to explain whistling that happened every morning at 3:03 and ended at the tick of 3:05. The group, our new neighbors, warned my parents that the whistling was quiet, would never harm or hurt us, as long as we didn't look for what was making the sound. This part they stressed, and I pushed my ear into the door, straining to hear them. People who went looking for the whistler had their luck changed, sometimes tragically. A black cloud would hang over anyone that looked. Anything that could go wrong would. The manila envelope the committee brought over contained newspapers clippings, stories about car crashes and ruined lives, public deaths, and freak accidents. Not everyone dies, I heard the head of the committee tell my dad, but the life goes out of them. Even if they live, there's no light in them ever again, no presence. My mom, I could tell she wasn't taking it seriously. She kept asking if this was some prank they play on new neighbors. At one point, my mom got angry, accused the committee of trying to scare us out of our new home. I asked them if they were racist on account of my dad being from the islands. My dad calmed her down, told her he could tell our new neighbors were sincere, and they were just trying to help us. He explained that he grew up hearing these kinds of stories from his mom, and that he knew there were strange things that walked among us. Some of those strange things were good, and some were bad, but most were just different. After the committee left, Dad went out to the hardware store, bought the canvas blinds and the latches and the locks, and installed them on every window in the house after dinner. The first night in our new house, I crept out of my room at 3 a.m., only to find my dad awake sitting in the living room couch holding my baby sister. My dad held up his finger in a motion, but patted the couch next to him. I sat and we waited. At exactly 3:03, we heard the whistling. Da 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 dum. Da 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 dum. It came and it went, just like our neighbor said. The whistling returns each night. We never look, and we enjoy our million little blessings every day. Nola breathes on her own, and she's grown into a strong, clever girl. My dad even joined the welcoming committee. We don't get new neighbors often. Would anyone want to leave? Why would anyone want to leave? But when a new family moves in, my dad and the welcoming committee brings them macaroni casserole, gift basket, and the manila folder. I can always tell by the look on my dad's face when he comes back if the family took the committee seriously, or if we'd be getting new neighbors again very soon. Not long ago, a family moved in directly next to us. Previous owner, Mrs. Addie, passed away at age 105. She lived a good life. Good long life. Our new neighbors seemed like they'd fit in just fine. They believed the welcoming committee, took my dad's advice about locking the shutters, since they had a young child of their own. Whatever newspaper clippings were in that manila envelope, whatever evidence, my dad never let us see. But I imagine it must have been awfully convincing since our neighbors got along with no issues for the first month. One night, when our neighbors had to leave town, they sent their son Holden to stay with us. He was 12, and a year under me in school. I didn't know him well before that night, but as soon as his parents dropped him off after dinner, I could tell this was going to be a bad time. Do you know who this is? Who is always out there whistling every night? Holden asked the moment the adults left the room. The three of us sitting in the den, some Disney movie playing idly in the television. My sister and I exchanged a glance. We don't talk about that. And I said, I think it's the weirdo that lives in the big yellow house on the corner, Holden said. Miss Tolles? My sister asked. No way, he's really nice. Holden shrugged. Must be a psycho killer then. Nola tensed. We don't talk about that, I repeated. Let's go to my room and play Nintendo. We spent the next few hours playing games, eating popcorns, and then watching movies. A typical sleepover, but I could see Holden was getting antsy. After my parents had wished us goodnight, locked the blinds, and gone to bed, Holden stood up from his beanbag and walked over to where Nola and I were sitting at my bed. Have you ever tried looking? He asked. It's nearly time. Like most sleepovers, we conveniently ignored any suggestion of a bedtime. I was shocked to see he was right. It was almost 3. I sighed. Oh, we don't. See, I can't even try to look because my dad locks the blinds every night and hides the keys. He continued ignoring me. So does our dad, said Nola. No, Holden replied. No, he doesn't. You saw him do it, I said, a little sharper than I meant to sound. Holden grinned. Your dad locks the blinds, yeah, but he doesn't hide the key. He keeps it right on his normal keychain. So I asked, worried. I already knew what he would say next, because I had noticed that my dad didn't bother hiding the key anymore after all of these years, because he knew we took it seriously. So after your dad locked up, but before your parents went to bed, I went to the bathroom, and on my way, I may have peeked into their room, and I may have seen your dad's keychain on his nightstand, and I maybe went and borrowed the key to the blinds. Nola and I stared at his grin, and his grin only grew wider. You're lying, I said. Holden shrugged. You can check if you want. Just open your parents' door and look. You'll see his keychain right there on the nightstand. Stay here, I told both of them. Don't move a muscle. I hurried over to my parents' room, but hesitated at the door. If Holden wasn't lying, my dad would be angry, beyond angry. I was scared thinking about it, but more scared of an open window with the whistler right outside. I opened the door barely an inch and looked in, but it was too dark to see. Taking a deep breath, I walked into the room. 2 steps into the dark room, I froze. The whistling started, and I could hear it clearly from my parents' room. I never realized they must have heard the sound every night since we moved into the house. They never told us. I don't think I could have slept through it. I stood there, listening to the whistling coming closer, unsure whether I should turn on a light or call out for my dad. Soft sounds from the living room brought me back to reality. Nola! I yelled, running out of my parents' room. Holden and Nola were standing near the front door next to a window. Holden wasn't lying. I could see him fumbling with the lock on one of the blinds. I heard a click. He did have the key. Holden let out a quick laugh. Nola stood next to him, hunched up, afraid but maybe curious. The whistling was right outside our house now. I think I made a sound. Called out. I can't even remember. Time felt frozen. Clock hands nailed to the face. But I felt myself moving. I'm not fast. I've never been athletic. Somehow, though, I covered the space between myself and Nola in a moment. My eyes were locked on her, but I heard Holden put the blinds all the way down so it could release. I heard the snap of it start to raise, and I heard the whistling just on the other side of the window. But I had my arms around Nola, and I turned us so she was facing away from the window. At the same time, I jammed my eyes shut. The blind whipped open. The whistling stopped. I felt Nola shaking in my arms. Don't look away, okay? Don't turn around. We were positioned so that she was facing back towards the hallway, and I was facing the window. My eyes were still shut. I felt her nod into my shoulder. I reached out with the arm not holding Nola and tried to touch Holden. My hand brushed against his arm. He was shaking worse than Nola. Holden? I asked. Silence. I reached past him and gingerly felt for the window. Eyes still sealed shut. The glass was cold against my fingers, colder than it could have been for the time of the year. I moved my hand up the window, searching for the string to the blind. The glass began to get warmer the further I reached, and there was a gentle hum feeding back into my fingertips. I tried not to think about what might be on the other side of the window. Finally, I touched the string and yanked the blind shut. I opened my eyes. In the dim light leaking out of the kitchen, I could make out Holden, pale and small, staring at the now closed window. Holden, I asked. He turned towards me and he screamed. Everything became a flurry of motion. Lights sparked to life in the hallway, then the living room. My parents' footsteps thudded across the hardwood floor. I didn't turn to look back at them. My eyes were glued to Holden. He was pale. He bit his lip so hard that there was a thin red line of blood running down his chin, and he wet himself. "What happened?" my dad asked from behind me. I managed to swivel around from Holden and look back. He looked. I'd never seen my dad scared before, but I saw that night, in that moment, an old, ugly terror stitched on his face. A parent's fear. "Just Holden," he mouthed to me. "Yes." My dad let out a breath. He looked so relieved I nearly expected him to cheer, but then he turned to Holden and my dad's face changed. I wonder if he felt bad for feeling good that Holden was the only one that looked. There was a knock on the door. We all froze. Holden whimpered. "Don't answer it," my mom said. I always thought she was a skeptic and just hummored my dad about the windows and the whistlers, but that night we were all believers. I noticed that both of my parents held baseball bats they must have taken from their bedroom. The knock came again, a little louder this time. "Please don't open the door," Holden whispered. My dad walked over to him, hugged him close. "We won't," my dad promised, still holding on his bat. "Nothing is coming in here. Tonight." Thud, thud, thud. This time the knocking was loud, enough to rattle the door. Holden screamed again, and Nola clutched her arms around my neck. My mom came over and knelt down next to us, wrapping my sister close. "Call the police," my mom whispered to my dad. The knocking instantly stopped. My dad looked over his shoulder at us. "Do you think he was cut off by frantic knocking that trailed off to a plate. Tap, tap, tap. "Police," said something from the other side of the door. The voice from the other side sounded exactly like my mom, like a parrot repeating the words back to her. "Please, call the police." Tap, tap, tap. "Police." My mom pulled us closer. "Police, police, police, police. Please stop," I heard her whisper. "I don't think calling them will help," my dad said. "How will we know if they're the ones at the door?" The knocking came harder than before. The door shook, then it stopped. After a long moment, I heard the knocking again, but it was coming from our back door. We all turned together towards the back door, but the knocking immediately returned to the front door, front to back, back to front. Loud, then quiet, then loud again. Suddenly, the sounds was coming from both doors at once, big, heavy blows like a sledgehammer, and something started rapping against all of the windows in the house. Then the walls. It was like we were living inside of a drum with a dozen people trying to play it all at once. Or we were a turtle and something was attempting to claw us out of our shell. "Stop!" Holden yelled. The knocking died. "I won't tell," Holden said, staring at the door. "I promise I won't tell anyone what I saw. Just please go away." We waited for nearly a moment, and then we heard it. A soft tap, tap, tap coming from the window Holden had looked through earlier. Holden started to cry, sobbing like a prisoner watching gallows being built outside their cell. My dad held him, brushed his hair, but never lied to him, never told him things would be okay. The tapping at the window went on for the rest of the night. We huddled together in the living room for I don't know how long. Eventually, my mom tried to take us kids into my room while my dad stayed to watch the door. But the second we moved into the bedroom, the knocking came back so loud it was impossible to ignore. I was afraid the door couldn't take it. We went back to the living room and the knocking stopped. Only the tap, tap, tap on the window remained. Both of us slept that night. The tapping stopped around 7 a.m. And that's about the time the sun comes up here. We waited another 2 hours before my dad opened the blinds from one window. He made us all go back to my parents' bedroom first. I heard him open the door, then come back in. "Okay," he told us, "it's done." Holden's parents came back around lunchtime. My mom and dad walked Holden over to his house. They all went inside for quite a while. Nola and I watched from the window. She stuck to me the whole day, right at my side, sometimes holding my hand. When my parents came back, they looked grim, but wouldn't tell us what they said to Holden's family. It was a Sunday, so we all spent the day together, ordered pizza, and watched movies. That night, everyone slept in my room. Nola and my mom in the bed with me and my dad in a chair he'd pull over. There was no knocking that night. or any night since. We didn't see much of Holden or his parents for the rest of that week, but Thursday, there was a moving truck in their driveway. Nala and I watched them packing up the whole afternoon after school. What sticks with me is how tired Holden and his parents looked. All three of them had the same parlor, grim mouths and lightless eyes. Even from across the street, I could tell something was very wrong. Holden and his family were gone before sunset. I remember the original welcoming committee said to my parents when we have moved in, "Not everyone who looks at the Whistler dies, but even those that live have the light go out of them, and the rest of their lives are full of misfortune, a million little tragedies. I think Holden's parents must have looked, either to comfort him if they didn't believe, or share the burden if they did. I watched Nola some days, happy and young and alive, and I wonder if I had been slower, she'd looked out that window that night. Would I have looked to comfort her, to share that burden? I'm glad I didn't have to find out. We still live in that house, in that neighborhood. We still hear our Whistler walking past every night. The blessings, the luck, the good things here are too good to leave. But we're careful. We don't have friends over to spend the night anymore. My dad hides the key to the blinds very, very well. Not that we've gone looking. Some things you just don't need to look for. My job is watching a woman trapped in a room. 3 years ago, I was looking at the local job classifieds online when one of the ads caught my eye. Not because of what it said, but because it said so little. Best I remember, the ad just read, "Job available, good pay, no benefits, discretion required." It then listed an email address, and that was all. At the time I was managing a music store, but I had already started hearing rumors we would be shutting down within the next year, and the likelihood of a transfer to another store was slim. I had been mostly looking for ad jobs listings for the last few days, but this was the first one that stood out, if only because I was bored and it was weird. So I sent an email. Half an hour later, I had a response telling me to go to a particular office building in an upscale part of the city at precise time for my screening. I went. After waiting for a few minutes in the lobby, I was taken to an office where I was given a series of forms and questionnaires to fill out. They collected them and told me they would be in touch. I had almost forgotten about the whole thing until a month later. I got a call saying I had been moved in the second stage of the hiring process. I was again given an address and time, and when I arrived, this time it was in a different nice office parked 20 miles away from the first one. I was met by a woman who introduced himself as Mr. Solomon. He escorted me into a large room that contained a chair and a desk. On the desks were 2 large monitors, a keyboard, and a mouse, and a bolted down metal box with 2 oversized buttons on it, one red, one green. He told me this room was a model for the place I'd be working if I took the job. He described the job as follows. I'd be working 7 shifts of 6 hours every week. My job would be simple. I would arrive at work 10 minutes early and enter an outer area that was like a locker room. I would have my own personal locker. I would store all my belongings in the locker and change into the provided work clothes. I was never, under any circumstances, to carry any item of my own into the surveillance room. I was never, under any circumstances, to take any item with me from the surveillance room. As for what I do in the surveillance room, I was told that the monitor on the left would constantly show a live stream from a high-definition camera in a remote location. My job was simply to watch the camera. Once an hour, I would get into the computer attached to the right monitor and began a briefing log describing anything interesting that occurred over the last hour. I would have no pens or pencils or paper. Now, I should never try to take any kind of written notes about the work. As for the red and green buttons, the red button was only to be used if there was an emergency. This meant something on the video or in my workspace that required outside help. The green button was to be hit if I saw something on the video feed that was particularly noteworthy. I would tell other people somewhere that, at least in my opinion, something interesting was going on. Solomon stressed that while I was given this discretion on when to use this button, I should err on the side of only using it if and when something of real significance occurred. He pointed out the camera on the ceiling of the room that we were in. He said the real room would be the same. My work would be observed and other people watching the room on the video feed as well. He said I was only a redundancy in case other systems failed. He then smirked and asked if I knew what he meant by redundancy. I nodded, trying not to show my irritation. I don't talk that good to people, so sometimes they think I'm dumb. That's okay. Let him think that if he paid me good enough. The pay was very good, $35 an hour. This worried me. I was already thinking this was some kind of weird psych experiment of secret government job, which I was okay with, but that kind of money to sit and watch a screen. My mom always told me that if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. This was seeming too good to be true. I asked if I was going to be doing anything illegal. Solomon laughed and said no. I asked if anyone was going to get hurt. Again, he shook his head no. He said the reason why we were paying so much was because they needed employees that were motivated to be professional and discreet. The work they were doing was important, and for various research reasons, it wouldn't be discussed. If I took the job, I would have to sign papers promising I would never discuss my work there, or I could be sued or locked up. I'm only breaking that now because of everything that's happened. So I took the job, and because they wanted me to start right away, I had to quit the store with no notice. I felt bad about that. I was excited about the new job too. It was a lot of money and it seemed like easy enough work, if a bit boring. I was nervous that there was something more to it, but I told myself it would just have to be seen. I would just have to see. No point in chickening out and wasting a good chance because I let my imagination go crazy. I was given the location of the job itself, and when I went there, I was amazed that it really was just like the model in the room I had been shown, with only a few differences. There was a locker room you had to pass through to enter the surveillance room, and there was a real small bathroom attached to the real surveillance room also. The real room had a small water cooler in the corner, but because I wasn't allowed to bring anything in with me, I had to eat before or after every shift. The biggest difference, of course, was that the monitors were turned on. The monitor was just a black and white terminal that you see in movies sometimes. I would type in my logs, but no internet to look at or anything like that. The left monitor, it was a video from a room. You could call it a bedroom, I guess, but because it had a bed on it. But it had lots of other stuff too. A TV, a sofa and chairs, a couple of tables, and plenty of empty space in between. The camera must be high up in the corner, because I could see pretty much everything except for the far side of the furniture at first. I didn't notice any of that stuff. All I saw was her. She looked like a little older than me, and she was very pretty when I first saw her. She was lying on her side on the sofa. That was the part of the room farthest from the camera, but the picture was very clear and I could tell that she was sleeping. I found myself leaning into the monitor so I could see her better. And I thought about what I was doing and felt embarrassed, like I was spying on her. A peeping Tom, my mom used to call it. I didn't want to be a peeping Tom, but I didn't want to be silly either. I needed to think about it slow. It was a good job and it wasn't anything wrong, right? I wasn't hurting anybody. The woman looked fine and the room was nice. She probably agreed to be there and it was all some experiment or something. I was just overreacting. So I sat down in the chair and began my work. It didn't take long before I understood more. The woman, I took to calling her Rachel, wasn't there off her free will. I never saw her hurt, but it was clear that she never left that room except to go into what I think is a bathroom area that my camera couldn't see. Well, she never left the room on her own, periodically, usually a couple times a week during my shifts. Men and women in strange outfits would come in and take her from the room. Sometimes she would struggle, but usually she would just go along with her head held low. I usually would always bring her back, though times she wasn't brought back during my shift. Were always the worst for me. I would worry about her until I got to work the next day and I saw her in the room watching TV or painting. She never looked hurt or even that upset except for when they took her. And even when she fought, they were always gentle with her. Still, I knew something was wrong. I considered quitting the job or just hitting the red button and getting someone to come so I could get some answers, or calling the police and showing them what the camera was showing me. Except I was scared of losing my job and scared of what these people might do to me if I quit or told on them. Solomon had told me when I took the job that part of being discreet was not asking questions. I would never be asked to do more than I already been told, and I could never tell anyone what I did or saw, and I could never ask questions about what I was doing or why. So I made excuses. It was all an experiment. She was crazy or sick, or they were trying to help her. She was doing a job just like I was, or if she was really a prisoner somewhere, at least I was watching to make sure she was okay. If they ever tried to hurt her, or I saw that she really didn't want to be there for sure, I could get help then. In a way, I told myself I was helping to protect her by watching. I don't expect you to think much of my excuses. I don't think much of them myself, especially now. But in my defense, when things changed, I didn't ignore it or try to explain it away. I knew something had to be done. Rachel would usually paint for an hour or two every day, and it seemed always to be during my afternoon shifts. The room had no windows as far as I could tell, but I guess she either used to use the clock or her own body's time to keep kind of a schedule. I always liked to watch her paint. The thing was, she was painting was always facing the wrong way for me to see it, but I could see her face as she worked. She always looked peaceful and happy when she was painting. Seeing her that way, smiling sincerely from time to time, she got something the way she wanted it, always made me happy. I first noticed something was wrong when she started painting more frequently a few weeks ago. Her expression was more focused and serious. There was attention to her movements that I wasn't used to seeing. At first, I thought she was just really trying to work hard on something, and I wanted her to tell her not to worry. Every few weeks, the other would come in and take the old paintings away, bringing in a new stack of, I think the word is canvases. But it was more than her being focused. Something was wrong. She didn't look happy, and she was going for hours at a time. In the span of 3 days, she had finished 4 paintings. I had been growing more and more worried watching her work, and when she finished the 4th, I found myself telling her to just stop and rest a while. I had grown accustomed to talking to the monitor, talking to her in my own way, but she didn't stop. Instead, she began moving the paintings, arranging them on the back and seat of the long sofa in the far end of the room. This was the first time I had gotten to see any of the paintings. Even when the others were taking them out, they always seemed to be turned away from the camera. I was still worried about her, but I was also happy to finally see something she had worked on. Happy and amazed. They were beautiful. One was a beautiful green forest, another was an old stone well, a third was a house sitting in lawn on a small island, and the last was an old-fashioned looking movie theater. All of them looked something like out of a dream, with trailing lines of colors mixing in the air around them, like leaves caught in the wind. It was only when I looked closely I realized that the lines of colors weren't random. They were words, easy to miss if you weren't looking close, and by themselves they didn't mean much. Just the ghost of a word somewhere in each of the paintings, easy to lose in everything else that was being shown. I leaned into the monitor and squinted, trying to read the words. Then my heart started thudding as I made them out. Blinking and rubbing my eyes, I looked again, reading them out loud in order, left to right, top pair, then bottom. Please,
Help me, Thomas. I pushed back from the monitor, my hand over my mouth. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how any of this could be happening. It wasn't just that she was asking for help, though that was a big part of it. It was my name. It was that my name is Thomas.